And so, that lack of understanding that essentially only institutions and organizations can have power, that there's no like, oh, we're going to give science back to the people, and is there's no such thing as populist science. It's ridiculous. It's a contradiction in terms. And so when you basically, this is a symptom of the larger problem, that when you essentially when you say to, Aristotle, identified three basically systems of government: monarchy, rule of the one; oligarchy, rule of the few; democracy, rule of the many. When we translate those into modern political English, instead of monarchy, oligarchy, democracy, we say dictatorship, democracy, populism. Right? So essentially, when your only opponent for oligarchy, or as we call it, democracy, is democracy, or as we call it, populism, you're essentially saying, okay, here I have this other way of governing which is better than your way of governing. And, if that's not true, you're really kind of shooting yourself in the foot, because you're essentially saying the alternative to oligarchy, the alternative to the rule of these experts who happen to have become really just literally fatally corrupted by the structure of their own oligarchy and the perverse incentives that it creates. The alternative to this is populism, and the alternative to this is basically, whatever gets the most shares on Facebook is going to prevail. Okay, that's populism. You want real populism? Hold a Facebook election, right? And Facebook can. I think Facebook at this point is probably better at identifying unique individuals than the state of Georgia. And I don't know about Florida, but if I were trying to trust who can identify the bots better, I might go with Facebook, right? But in any case, if you're only if you're only replacement for Dr. Fauci and Peter Daszak and Shingli and Batwoman, and if your only replacement for this system is let's have a Facebook election to see if vaccines will make our noses fall off, you're really you're batting zero. You're going to continue to bat zero. You basically, you're only pretending to have a solution, and in fact what you're doing is you're essentially reinforcing the propaganda that says, wow, the rule of these experts is sort of the only way. So when you basically take those two approaches, one is let's fix this system in some way or another, and the other is let's replace it with, I really can't imagine a society much less suited to democracy than the one we live in. That is much less suited to populism. Populism is most effective when you have a homogenous population, when you have a virtuous population, when you have a well-educated population, when you have finally an aggressive population, a population that's basically not, whatever the a passionate population, whatever the opposite of apathetic is. And if you look at all those bars, we're sitting down there, near zero, next to the Romans of 300 AD, right? And so if populism in the leadership of the many over the few and the one is really going to be your thing, you're basically taking something that doesn't work and you're saying, well, the only, which is, the rule of Fauci, Daszak, and Batwoman, and you're saying, well, my only alternative to this thing is something that seems much more improbable, that has basically never historically worked, that, even the founders were, extremely suspicious of. And so you're essentially leading your fellow prisoners back into the trap, because you're leading them down what seems to be an escape route, but is in fact a box canyon. And that's why I'm a monarchist, essentially. And so what this event does is it says, okay, you really need to think clearly about what it would take to turn virology back from a liability to the human race to an asset, because right now its balance sheet is pretty red. And until you can think sort of clearly about that and clearly about how should this have been done and under what kind of system, what sort of power would it take? And, I mean, this is a completely open-ended question. It doesn't have to be a monarchy of any kind. You can, in theory, I suppose, I've never heard of it, replace an oligarchy with another oligarchy. And so you're like, okay, how do I build... And, of course, even in a monarchy, no one's a government of one, right? So how do I build an institution that would have the credibility to basically stand up here, irrespective of the authority, which might have to be gotten by other means? But you don't have to you might not even need the authority to just build the credibility. But essentially what I see is that I see a lot of people talking about this stuff, and I see no one talking about how do you build the alternative credibility that's something that can say, no, this is not right.
Well, and I want to throw out another factor here and get your take on it too, which is I was just listening to or watching a podcast with Bret Weinstein and the doctor Pierre Corey. You know this name, Pierre Corey?
I don't know Pierre Corey so well, but I know of Bret Weinstein.
So they were talking about this story that Dr. Corey has been a front person for around the world about the benefits people are having with using ivermectin as a prophylactic or even early treatment that's having significant effect apparently, and has had some trials, some good data. We've had the Mexico City as a policy started introducing it and really clamped down on COVID when they introduced it. You had the Ministry of Brazil indicating people should go check out ivermectin, and then they had the Twitter page, shut down by Twitter because it was considered to be, misinformation.
I'll interrupt you. I'll interrupt you right here with my perspective on ivermectin, which is that I actually live in horse country out here, so there's a lot of feed stores and so forth, and I guess it was around February, I went to a conference in Vegas, which was full of COVID deniers. I was really the only one wearing a mask. So here I am in COVID world in Vegas. And in fact, at one point in COVID world, in this COVID fest, I found I was talking to one-on-one to someone who, is arguably one of the world's leading COVID deniers, a very smart fellow. And more than that, he appeared to have a cold. So in any case, that's my COVID attitude. So I was like, what I did was before I went down to the feed store and I got myself one of these little tubes of, I forget the brand name. It's horse paste. But it's horse paste with ivermectin, and I had a little, half spoonful of ivermectin every day, and I didn't get COVID. So that's your sample size of one. The thing is when I look, and I'll tell you my thinking behind that, which was just a very simple rationalist type thinking. I was like, well, the risks of ivermectin are very well known, and they're very well known to be very low, and so my ability to either evaluate this research by myself, or B, delegate my trust to another party or institution which I feel is worthy of being trusted to validate this pile of evidence, is basically zero. So I don't have an institute, could I listen to some podcast and someone sound perfectly convincing? I'm sure I could. But I would be like someone sitting in a courtroom, basically listening only to the prosecution's case and being like, wow, this fucker's got to hang. But if only all I heard was the defense case, I was like, wow, this guy has serious, charges for a claim against the government. People are... One of the elements of populism is basically people think that they can do this job universally by themselves, which is just, unless you're Johnny von Neumann, is just ridiculous. And so you essentially have to have, and maybe you have that kind of trust in Bret Weinstein. I don't know. I haven't listened to a lot of Bret Weinstein. You can imagine sort of building, that trust in a way, but you have to. You're still even when you think about, oh, here's this podcaster I really trust him. Bret would never let me down. He would never tell me something, blah, blah, blah. The level of trust that you're building there is like, 1,000 times smaller and less imposing than the institutions that it's coming up against. It's like saying, oh, I don't trust my bank, so I'm going to give my money to Johnny down the street. Right, Johnny's going to put it under his mattress, and is Johnny's mattress? Well, Johnny's he's got 2 deadbolts on his door. He's strapped and he's got a big pit bull, right? And that's basically the sort of banking equivalent of trusting, Bret Weinstein. Yeah, is anybody going to fuck with Johnny down the street? No, probably not. Is he going to give you back your money? Yeah, he probably is. But is this like a bank with marble pillars and an FDIC charter and fuck no, right? And is it a blockchain? Fuck no. And so you're essentially doing you're playing, when you play with these stakes, you're playing against, this is the most this principle of trusting the experts is the most fundamental principle of how our regime works. And it worked very, very well at first, because at first it relied on experts from a different era when they were not trusted, and those experts had no conflicts of interest. And those conflicts of interest basically poison sort of all the, fields that tell the government what to do. And they're those institutions are fucked. They're done. You can't recover from that poisoning. And yet you need something that is the equivalent of the bank with marble pillars and not Johnny down the street.
Well, my point in what I was introducing, it's not just, I've been, looking at this. I'm not an advocate of ivermectin. I'm just pointing out